largest moon of the year, so it's the mega moon. So there you have it. There are the different full moon names: harvest moon, blue moon, mega moon, and all the rest. So enjoy it. Enjoy tonight's harvest moon. For SLU, I'm Bob Berman.
This is Slew. I'm Bob Berman, back with you. I've never really left. This is all live, all happening in real time, and being brought to you by the Slew people, the production team headed by Trisha in the middle of Connecticut, our Slew chief engineer, Paul Cox, in the British Isles, Will Gator, our Slew astronomer. We've got feed partners on 3 different continents, bringing you feeds from Africa and Europe, the Canary Islands, our main telescope in the Canary Islands, Canada, the United States. It's coming to you from all over. And thank you to the entire team and all of you and all of our partners bringing you this event. And especially all of you viewers and listeners and SLU members who are watching this. Use that tag, SLU Eclipse, SLOOH, SLU Eclipse. If you want to talk to us, make a comment, ask a question, we're here. And this is a 5 hour event, and this is the middle of it. Right now, we have reached mid thing more than 2 degrees more or less than its present 23.5 degrees. So, this is a part of the scheme, the system, the architecture, the design, whether you believe nature itself is intelligent. I suppose you could also believe that it's all a random design, whatever it is. We're happy for it. We're grateful that we have what we have. We're going to be seeing another viewpoint when we have a interview with the Vatican astronomer spokesperson coming up soon on the show. Hey, look at this view. This is from South Africa. One of our feed partners showing you the moon looking quite dark. I'd say it's almost a brownish red in this. Notice that the lighting on the edge is now less pronounced than it was before. We're at mid eclipse, which means the moon is most centrally inside Earth's main shadow, the umbral shadow right now. If you were a pessimist, we might call it the darkest, gloomiest part of the eclipse. An optimist, if you're away from the lights of any city, you can now see the splendors of the Milky Way and all the faint stars that were hidden from view during the full moon that preceded this. A lunar eclipse can only happen at the moment of full moon. Just so happens that not only is this the full moon, it's also the harvest moon. We've already talked to you about what makes the harvest moon so special. It doesn't look different from other moons. Some people imagine that the harvest moon is bigger or smaller or redder or more orange, something. No, no, no. Harvest moons look the same as any other full moon. The whole big deal with that is defining it as the full moon closest to the autumn equinox on September 23rd means that it's going to rise and set most nearly due west and due east. But more importantly, that means that it rises at most nearly the same time, night after night. Usually, the full moon or any phase of the moon comes up about 50, 55 minutes later per night, almost an hour later each night, but not the harvest moon. The harvest moon rises only 20 minutes later each night. It really depends on your latitude. The farther north you go, or the farther south, the farther you go away from the equator, the more extreme the harvest moon effect becomes. So the harvest moon is more of an effect than a physical appearance. So if you're up in Canada, Alaska especially, or you get down to the southernmost Australia or New Zealand, now you're going to see it coming up only 10 minutes later per night, almost the same time, night after night. From Alaska, let's say the middle of Alaska, Fairbanks, at this time, the time of harvest moon, if you look up the times of moonrise, it can actually rise earlier the next night than it did the night before. Truly weird. That's weird stuff. The moon coming up at an early hour, night after night. So, all these strange effects are associated with the harvest moon. So, tonight we have the harvest moon, always a full moon by definition, going into Earth shadow. Only a full moon can go into Earth shadow. So far, that's not so weird. It's unusual, but not weird at the same hour. And that was this hour between 10 and 11 o'clock. We're there now at the moon's closest approach to Earth in all of 2015. Now, it's only 14% larger than the very smallest full moon back on March 5th. It's not a big change. And if you've been one of the lucky ones with clear skies that have looked at the moon in the sky, can you really say that it's a larger looking moon? I'll bet you can't. If you saw it rise, that's another story because when it's low down, you get the moon illusion, then it looks larger. But right now, look for it, and I think you'll honestly say that it looks like any other full moon. So all the talk about a supermoon, a hypermoon, a mega moon, and we're calling it that too. Look on your screen because everyone is, even NASA is calling it a supermoon or a mega moon. But honestly speaking, when you look at it, it looks like any other moon because the human eye cannot see a 14% difference, and the deviation from average is only 7%. It's just not large enough to perceive. The other thing, of course, it's called is the blood moon. We all know that. But look at the color. Even on this image from Ontario, Canada, it's more orange than red. I think we'd all agree. And if you go out and look at it yourself, you'll see it may be looking a little differently. And that brings up the question, which is real? The one that you see in the sky, maybe even using binoculars. Ordinary binoculars are great, by the way, on this moon. Or the various images that we have from our feed partners. And you'll notice the colors are a little different in each one. Well, the answer is what you see is the truth, is the real moon. Because any exposure that we take is going to change with the vagaries of the camera, the equipment, and the type of exposure. Like, look at this image now from the United Kingdom. Here, we wanted to get an optimum exposure. And we're grateful for the Basingstoke Astronomical Society bringing us these live images all in real time. And notice it's maximally exposed to capture that redness on the limb of the moon, but that means the center of the moon is underexposed. Compare this to what you would see if you went outside right now is you'd see the entire moon glowing with an orange color with one edge looking brighter than the rest. That edge is the part of the moon that's farthest from the center of Earth's umbral shadow. Earth is just about 8,000 miles in diameter, and our shadow tapers smaller and smaller. And when it reaches the moon, a quarter of a million miles away, it has tapered to a size that's still quite a bit larger than the moon, but smaller than the original Earth. So, because of that, it's about twice the diameter of the moon. So, once the moon is in the shadow, it'll stay there for about a full hour, and that's what we're seeing. We're in totality. It's lasting for an hour and 13 minutes. We're in the mid part of that now, which means we're seeing the most even lighting on the moon, the least weird, the least deviation in color. Check it out yourself. As I say, if it's clear, look for the difference between the brightest and the dimmest part of the moon and tell us what you think about the color. How would you assess it? To our eyes here, I was just outside taking a look myself. I would say it looks orangey, coppery orange colored, not day glow like this image from Ontario, Canada. Again, there's no wrong or right. It just has to do with the kind of exposure. It's certainly uneven lighting. We expected that. And nowhere did it get to blood color, that is a deep red, traffic light red, or stop sign red, or fire engine red. I think at all times we would agree it's more like something in between coppery red, like a penny, and an orangey color. It's very cool to see the difference from eclipse to eclipse. In 1992, we had a total lunar eclipse that happened after a major volcanic eruption on Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines, and that threw so much dust in the air that very little light got refracted or bent into Earth's shadow. And because of that, the moon's was very, very dark. It almost vanished during that eclipse. So we can have lunar eclipses that are almost black. We can have lunar eclipses, rare ones that are barely eclipsed at all, that'll look just ever so slightly pink, very, very light colored. And it's really an environmental report card about ourselves. So it's really a unifying event. Not only is Earth watching this, not only are we all seeing the same thing, and even more than this being the harvest moon and the closest moon of the year, boy, we're all connected watching this. But on top of that, we're observing the effects of our own atmosphere on the moon because it's light bent around the edge of Earth that's hitting the moon. And if we were very polluted, very little light would get there. If it's very cloudy along the Earth's limb or edge, very little light would reach the moon. What we're seeing here is a normal looking total lunar eclipse. So it's kind of reassuring. Everything's okay in the universe. It is as it should be. Earth's air is not unusually polluted. We're seeing things just perfectly. This also concludes what's called a tetrad. And many people are making a lot out of that, and it's kind of unusual in a way. You see, once you have an eclipse can only happen when the exact three-dimensional plane of the sun and the earth and the moon are in a straight line. That can next happen 6 months later. But 6 months later, the next eclipse doesn't have to be full, and usually is not. It can be a partial eclipse where the moon doesn't quite make it into the center of Earth's shadow, or it can be a penumbral eclipse where the moon really skims the edge of the shadow. But what if you get a total eclipse again 6 months later? Well, then what about 6 months after that? Can you get another one? You can. It's rare, but you could. And then what about a fourth? That's the most you could ever get. If you do get four total lunar eclipses in a row, as close together as they can possibly be, that is every 6 months, that's called a tetrad. Now, there were no tetrads at all from the year 1600 to the year 1900. 3 centuries, no tetrads. So this is the fourth and final eclipse of this tetrad. So if you put it into historical perspective, it's very rare. It's not just the mega moon, it's not just the harvest moon, it's not just the largest moon of the year that's going into eclipse, but it's also the final and, of course, most important member of the tetrad. However, just so we don't think that, again, it's Armageddon or the end of the world, because of the tick tock motion of celestial mechanics or geometry, there are a number of tetrads in our lifetimes. In the 21st century, there are 8 sets of tetrads. So, when seen in that light, tetrads are not so terribly rare. Still, it's interesting enough to deserve mention, Joe. So I thought I'd just tell you what that tetrad business is all about, and that this indeed is the fourth and final member of the tetrad. I'm going to be back again. We're going to be exploring various aspects of the eclipse. We're going to come on with other slew astronomers. We'll have our interview and great music accompanying it. Please continue to send us hashtag slew eclipse, comment, ask us questions, anything about that. We'll keep watching because totality still has a while to go. This is the deepest part of it, but we're going to watch it progress. It's very active, animated, alive kind of organic thing, this eclipse. So we're here. It's 5 hours of coverage, and so we're going to continue. I'll be back with you in a little bit for Slew. I'm Bob Berman.
Hello, and thanks for joining us here on SLU for the Mega Harvest Moon Eclipse. I'm Trisha Ennis, the producer here, and today I'm taking us on a tour of a brand new feature here on SLU, the Golden Record, a place for us to come together to share stories, photos, art, and even poetry, all surrounding the universe and our place in it. Being so close to the Earth and so much more changeable than the Sun with its many phases, changing size, and effect on the tides, and if you believe the rumors on people and animals, it's no surprise that the moon would have a place in the hearts of poets. There are plenty of songs and poems about the moon, some of which have made their way onto the Golden Record, and a couple that I want to share with you today. First up, we're probably all familiar in some way with Emily Dickinson and her interesting relationship with capital letters. In the mid-19th century, she wrote a poem called "The Moon is Distant from the Sea," a short piece that speaks of the moon and its command over the sea, as if from two lovers. The moon is distant from the sea, and yet with amber hands she leads him, docile as a boy, along appointed sands. He never misses a degree. Obedient to her eye, he comes just so far, toward the town, just so far, goes away. O Signor, thine an amber hand, and mine the distant sea, obedient to the least command, thine eye imposed on me. That poem has been read and arranged many times over the years and has even become a song performed by choirs. You can listen to one of those arrangements on the Golden Record right now. Just go to SLU's homepage to find it. But of course, this is an eclipse, and the drama of something like tonight has certainly inspired poets on its own. Poets like Thomas Hardy, who wrote this piece called At the Lunar Eclipse. Thy shadow, earth, from pole to central sea, now steals along upon the moon's meek shine, in even monochrome and curving line of imperturbable serenity. How shall I link such sun-cast symmetry with the torn, troubled form I know is thine, that profile placid as a brow divine, with continents of moil misery? And can immense mortality but throw so small a shade, and heaven's high human scheme be hemmed within the coasts yon arc implies? Is such the stellar gauge of earthly show, nation at war with nation, brains that teem, heroes, and women fairer than the skies? These are just a few of the many selections that you can find online, in poetry books, everywhere, of artists connecting themselves with the things they see in the night sky and expressing confusion about their own lives here on Earth with metaphor about the moon and the sun and the stars. If you know of any and you'd like to add them to the Golden Record, all SLU members are actually able to log in right now. Just go to SLU's homepage and click on the Golden Record link, and you can see all of the many things that we've added to it, and of course add your own. We'd like to see you there.
Well, hello, my friends. We're back. Actually, we've always been here. This is live coverage of the great mega harvest moon eclipse here at SLU. We've been bringing you feeds from all over the world, untold countries, continents, and all sorts of things. I hope you've enjoyed that golden record and the poetry as much as I have. And, the people in the production end of things in central Connecticut are, I love what they're doing. So hopefully you've enjoyed this as we now approach the end of totality. We have just a few minutes left. We're counting it down, a little under 6 minutes for that. And to discuss this, let's bring in our friend from England. We're going to go back to uh, Will Gator, who has been outdoors. Is the moon still up? It must be getting low in the west for you there, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's getting low in the west. The limb is actually brightening now. It was a very very dark totality. I thought much darker than I can remember the last one I saw in 2007. So
Yes, yes, I quite agree. During mid eclipse, that was a yummy, nice. The moon was fully there, blanketed, nice and cozy. And now we're getting that uneven lighting again as we prepare for the edge of the moon to come out into the sunlight at last. Well, so tell me more of your impressions there from England
but
while you watch this.
Bob, Bob, this is the face of an astronomer who lives in Britain, where usually it's cloudy. I'm just absolutely over the moon. It was just stunning. I mean, my neighbours have been out. We've been looking through binoculars. It's been just extraordinary, and I think just seeing the reaction online, people on the hashtag and on social media, and just watching this footage, it's just been incredible and wonderful that we've had clear skies over what seems like quite a large portion here in the UK. I don't know about the rest of Europe, but yeah, just a really magical few hours this has been, and just it's one of those things that really does make you aware of your place in the universe. I think. I don't know what you think, Bob.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you and I both know that a total solar eclipse, and SLU brings them all to you, that requires expeditions to very small places of Earth. They are knock you backward event that brings tears to people's eyes and much harder to see. Only lasts a few minutes. This is a lunar eclipse. Now, this is the vox populi of astronomy events because everyone who has the moon in their sky is seeing this. So, this is more of a unifying global, worldwide. Let's all dig this at the same moment together, regardless
Yeah.
of our time zones. So, yeah, I second what you say. Absolutely, it
Mm.
just feels great. Give me more impressions, Will.
Um, I had a pair of 10 by 50 binoculars with me tonight, and I wasn't. I mean, we've already touched on the fact that it was a very dark eclipse, but I was basically stargazing around the constellation of Pisces. I mean, it was ridiculously dark. The Milky Way was. We had a little bit of thin cloud that came over at the beginning of totality, but actually, for most of the last bit of totality, very clear skies. The Milky Way very clear. I'm kicking myself now. I forgot to actually see if I could see Andromeda, the Andromeda galaxy with the naked eye. I meant to do that, but I was being preoccupied with getting some pictures. But oh yeah, it was just magical, and also some of the things that I don't know whether you got to see it or whether saw it, but I was looking out for that classic turquoise edge, that the sort of blue edge that you sometimes get from stratospheric ozone. It absorbs red light, and you get this lovely sort of turquoisey edge. Didn't think I saw as strong as one as we have seen in previous years. I don't know what you thought.
No, no, I didn't see that with the eye. No, I
Mm,
certainly didn't see that. Also, one has to be wary of that because remember the complementary color to red is blue or blue green. So when you're looking from the red part of the moon to the other, you have to be careful. Some old astronomy books list the companion of Antares as a green star. Now we
mm,
know there are no green stars. So why did these venerable astronomers see it as green? We know the answer. They looked at the main a member of the pair saw it as distinctly ruddy, and then when they turned their gaze to the white companion, they projected green onto it. So we always have to be careful with that. But
Mm.
no, I quite agree with your perception of this. Very, very nice eclipse. When we see a total solar eclipse, of course, totality, those precious few minutes, brings phenomena such as the corona going across the sky and other things. You look for other things other than
Mm.
that blacked out sun. You look for things around the sun and in the sky adjacent to it, like the corona. Well,
Mm.
usually in lunar totality, you don't think about that. You think about, well,
No.
you're going to look on the moon, you're going to look for the redness, you're going to look for the uneven lighting. But quite right. What
Mm.
you can do if you're not in a bright city is you can look for the surrounding stars and watch the magical transformation of the full moon night to a night where suddenly the beautiful, serene Milky Way and all the faint stars
Mm.
briefly have returned. And
Yeah,
lovely.
it, yeah, actually, hadn't really thought about it in that sort of way, but you're absolutely right, aren't you? I often think in total solar eclipses, there's that sort of the last 10 minutes before totality, you get that ethereal silver glow, don't you? Well, we sometimes you hear people talking about lunar eclipses being not quite as spectacular, but actually, it's quite something to see the full moon. When I started out this evening, all around me was bathed in the beautiful silver blue moonlight, and then of course it's not there, and I'm looking around now, and actually, it's not. It's dark here right now, apart from the lights I've got lighting me up. So I think there is this drama if you know where to look, or you're willing to sort of go and seek it out.
Well, that tells me, I've never been to your house, and since you're expecting a baby anytime, nor will I get invited probably because you'll have less of a guest room than you had before. But
Yeah.
this tells me you're not in. Well, I knew you were not in London, but you're not in an area that totally washes out the sky, are you? There.
Not quite. I'm actually on the edge of a sort of suburban zone, but I'm quite lucky in that I actually look out over fields, farmland. So, yeah, there's no real major sort of direct sources of lights. All the street lights are hidden behind buildings. So, yeah, quite lucky in that respect.
And here we are. The countdown to zero we've hit it. And now the
Mm.
total part of the eclipse is over. And that doesn't mean that it's inferior, because now we go through the real strange changes where the phases in reverse of what we had before as the moon continues to creep um, half a degree per hour through the constellation of Pisces the fish. As it does so, it emerges from the shadow, but it also displays those strange looking shapes and lighting. And just look at this image that we have here. This is from New Hampshire in the United States. And there are some, granted, there have to be some artifacts in capturing such a great range of brightness. So we're looking from white on one end to almost red, you could say, on the upper left. It's still an orange red. It's not really a blood red or a stop sign red, but still it's close to red on the upper left, yellow in between. And so I'm interested in all of our SLU members and observers around the world looking at the moon at this moment. What do you see? What is the range of strange lighting and strange shapes that you're actually seeing yourself? And how does it compare with these many SLU partners and views that we're bringing you?
Mm. Yeah, we was talking about the end of the umbral phase, the sort of the moon's sort of starting to peak out, and I'm looking around, and there's almost kind of like like a sort of diamond ring effect that the moon is so dark on that right hand side. As I look at it, the bit that is actually sticking out is really quite pronounced. So maybe what was the name you gave it, Bob? The heme or something?
A hemogenesis, that's the start,
That's
the
it.
beginning, the birth of the red part. But now this is the end of it. So now we need another Latin phrase for we'll look for when the red part is over. In other words, when
Mm.
our eyes, when our cameras, when our CCDs, in trying to capture the moon correctly, when there's so much moon that has returned, all bathed in sunlight, that the cameras have to be stopped down and we underexpose the red and it becomes black again. And maybe the name for that would be the onset of darkness. rather than putting it in the negative at the end of the redness, maybe the beginning of darkness. Although that does sound a little morbid, doesn't it? It's like
Sounds like a film title, I think. Look at that
yes,
view.
that's
That's
right. That's right.
gorgeous.
And so, look at that, the full sky view from the Canary Islands and the main slew, one of the main slew observatories. We're not going to see this much longer. It's going to be a lot of fun an hour from now when the full moon is back. You won't see
Yeah.
those stars. You'll see a blue sky. People don't realize it, but the full moon actually does paint the sky blue. We can perceive it as a dark blue to the eye, but when we use CCDs or film, it brightens it up like the daytime sky. So, goodbye to Orion and the dog star to its lower left, and all these lovely stars and their lovely colors, true colors. This is showing you bringing you the all sky view in true color of the onset of the winter sky, very arguably the brightest part in all the heavens. Um, that even a faint trace of the Milky Way above Orion right now, and that will go bye as that moon brightens up.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really interesting to contrast the colours of Betelgeuse there in the top left of Orion. See how orangey it is, and the moon there. They look quite similar on my screen that I'm looking at.
They do, they do, they do. Yeah, that's right, that's right. And
Beautiful.
yeah, notice long as we're talking about star colors, looking at this all sky, notice that you can see bluish white. The bottom star of Orion, Rigel, is bluish white. The dog star Sirius is bluish white. We see the not really red, but again, kind of an orangey, yellow orange of both Betelgeuse and to its right, Aldebaran, but no green. Stars come in every color except for green. There's even black stars and brown stars. There's even one arguably purple star. And that one I invite you to look at the next time you're using your telescope. We're going to come to that season before long where you can look at the lovely Cor Caroli in the
Ah,
alpha
yeah.
star of Canes Venatici. And its companion, the B star, is this odd color that you'll see in various texts as amber, yellow, topaz, blue, purple. It's all over the place. I've always seen it as purple, however. So there may even be purple stars, but no green stars. That's the one color we don't have. There's a good reason for it, and the stars obey that law. No obvious green stars. And I agree with you. That moon looks like, with that ruddy color that's still being thrown onto the moon, looks like it matches Betelgeuse very
It
nicely.
is.
That star in
It is.
Orion.
It is getting lighter, though, isn't it? There's a definite. I mean, there's a real slither now. It looks like if I just glance behind me, It just looks like a crescent moon now. If I just glance, it's really, really quite beautiful. Really beautiful. I think we're soon going to lose that lovely red color.
Now, it's got to be awfully late for you there in the British Isles, isn't it?
It is just coming up to 4:30 in the morning.
So now, are
I
you
haven't.
practicing for the baby that you're going to have soon? Is that what's going
Ab-
on here?
absolutely. I haven't started into the hobnobs yet. Once I get started into eating those biscuits, that'll see me through to the end.
So here we are at SLU. We've been bringing you this eclipse from the beginning, even from the beginning of the penumbral part. We've watched the subtle shading of the moon. We've watched the moon having a black bite taken out of it. We've discussed the harvest moon, the mega moon, the all the different lore and legend and mythology and science surrounding it during this really marvelous event. I'd say it has gone as splendidly or more so than we could have hoped. We had wonderful
Mm.
hashtag slew eclipse um, tweets and messages from all over the world from people that have been enjoying it with us, either because they had clouds and this was the only way they could see it here at SLU, or because they were doing both, which is really warms the cockles of our hearts to know that they're taking it in directly as well as joining us here for it. That's just marvelous. We're going to continue with this coverage, bring you some more stuff, and an interesting interview coming up, and looking at various aspects of it as we continue to watch in real time, live, the moon creeping out of Earth's shadow at a hefty speed, 2,280 miles an hour. That's no slouch. And that's the actual orbital motion as it leaves our shadow for good, our final eclipse of this tetrad. So, Will, thank you so much for being part of this. He's our SLU astronomer and hosts many of the shows that we do here. And so we'll be back. We're always here live, but we'll be back and talk to you again in a little bit. I'm Bob Berman. That's Will Gator, and this is SLU. is a real treat. We're now going to talk to Father James Krasinski,
Mhm.
who works with the Vatican Observatory, and the subject is, well, this is the eclipse that everybody's watching. So
Yeah,
that's the interaction of the Earth Moon system. So I think we'll take this time to reflect on the thing that really connects us, and that's our own planet, which brings us to a bunch of questions. I'm going to start with this one.
sure.
The Pope, a very popular Pope, has
Yeah.
spoken a great deal about environment and climate
hmm
change. So, can you tell us what exactly is the Pope's stance on these subjects?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, especially with the lunar eclipse occurring, being that we're able to get a sense of what's going on in our Earth's atmosphere based on the lunar eclipse, that given the reflection of the glow from our atmosphere off of the moon. And I was thinking about that in light of Laudato Si, because what the Pope is getting at is that idea that we have a common home. We have a common home of the Earth. And we hear in Genesis that we are called to be stewards of that common home. Now, some Christian traditions have taken that word dominion from Genesis and interpret it more of an individualistic way. How can I use the earth for my own benefit, my own gain? More of a utilitarian understanding and approach to that. However, from the Catholic tradition, we understand that word more from the standpoint of stewardship, rooted in the ancient idea of kingship, meaning that when a king was given a kingdom, the responsibility was not only for himself, but also for all the subjects of the kingdom and also for the future of the kingdom. And so, therefore, the application of that very ancient principle that Pope Francis is making in this encyclical is that we have a common home. And if we understand the whole idea of what it means to care for creation or have dominion over it from a standpoint of using creation, we've misinterpreted what Scripture speaks of. What it really means is that on this planet and on this common home, that all of us are asked to be caretakers of this, to make sure that it is um, able to build up human dignity with the people who currently live on it, but also to leave the earth in such a state that for future generations, that it can also build up dignity as well. And so therefore, when you look at the problems of ecology, when you look at things like pollution, the crisis that we find in a rarity of drinking water that's beginning to pop up globally, when we look at things like global warming and where we begin to see things such as the oceans rising, we see the Pope in the encyclical very clearly saying that we need to have, as he, in his words, an ecological change of heart, an ecological conversion. We need to have an understanding within ourselves that even though science might not have all the answers yet in terms of why these things are happening, we can see that they're happening, and we know that we can change our behaviors to give ourselves a better environment, to lift up human dignity, especially with the poor, in which environmental changes affect the most, being that they're not able to shelter themselves. I live in a very beautiful home. I have heating and air conditioning. And when the temperatures get warm, I can come in and turn the air conditioning on. And I can create a false environment to make myself comfortable. The homeless don't have that advantage. They don't have that ability. When it's overly hot, they have to find a cooling center. When it's cold, they have to find a warming shelter. And so, therefore, the Pope is really calling us to see not only a change in our attitudes of the environment, but how that change of the environment is connected to the people that we live with on our common home, on our global home. And that transcends religious ideology, that transcends denomination, and it calls all of us to find the word that we commonly use in theology is solidarity. To find that regardless of religion, regardless of creed, regardless of country of origin, regardless of where our home is, that we need to care for one another.
Now, let's go a little bit more general with that because some
Sure.
people believe that faith and science are mutually exclusive
Right.
endeavors. Now, as
hmm
someone whose work crosses both of those fields, I'm speaking about yourself,
Yeah.
do you agree?
I disagree. I mean, when you look at the nature of faith and the nature of science, at the core of both of them is truth. And the exploration of truth is to uplift the human person. John Paul II has a beautiful encyclical entitled Fides et Ratio, and that's Latin for faith and reason. And the very first line of Fides et Ratio is that faith and reason are the two wings of which the human person ascends. And so therefore, if we understand the relationship properly, being that science limits itself to the study of the observables, the study of the material, the study of those things we can measure, those things that we can understand in terms of the material world, there's no conflict. And if anything that the church should be emphasizing, we need to develop our reason. We need to explore science on its own terms, not in terms of what sometimes very sincere Christians, but unfortunately, in my opinion, some Christians that don't have a terribly healthy understanding of how to do this, they try to either fit science into the scriptures or they try to fit scripture into science. And both of that just creates an intellectual mess. You end up reinventing errors that the church has had committed for centuries, such as making God one being within creation. If you want to try to have a clear, trying to fit scripture inside of a scientific metaphor, in terms of a scientific structure. When we look at God, God is not a being in creation, but being itself. God is beyond time. God is not conditioned to time. And so therefore, when you understand the true relationship between the nature of faith and the nature of science, they're really a complement to each other and is necessary for the person to embrace, to grow in knowledge. And so therefore, a Catholic Christian should have no fear of studying science on its own terms, because science is an exploration of truth. Faith is an exploration of truth. And if you are exploring the truth, you are ultimately seeking after the source of that truth. And from my Catholic tradition, that we clearly see that leads us to the origin of our understanding of God as the source of all truth. So there's a lot more that could be said, but that's a little bit of a Reader's Digest answer to your question.
No, and a good answer, very clear answer. I get that as that if one has faith in God, and then one also explores science, that there's no conflict, that both can coexist. Now, here's where our question in the sciences would come up. What about you go past God and go to Scripture? For example, let's say, we're talking about science. I'm being pro-science. Let's say a science climatologist or meteorologist tells us that the Great Flood could not have happened because if every bit of water vapor in the atmosphere precipitated out as rain, it would only raise the oceans by 1 inch. So you could not have a global flood. Seems to contradict Noah and the Bible story. Now, in a case like that, what do you do with that? Do you allow that finding that there could not have been a flood, or what? What happens then?
Great question. And what you're really getting at with that question is the difference between understanding the literal sense of Scripture versus a literalist interpretation of Scripture. Meaning that a literalist interpretation of Scripture that's a little bit more of somewhat of an evangelical fundamentalist take would be to take Scripture on face value and try to understand precisely what you did, and to try to think that, well, effective with the science. That's not the Catholic perspective, and that's not a healthy understanding of approaching to Scripture. What the understanding of Scripture in the literal sense of Scripture is that we understand that the Bible is not really a book, but a library. And whenever you have a library, you have different parts of the library. You have poetry, you have mythology, you have different genres of writing, you have stories that are meant to point to a truth, even though the historical data of it may not necessarily jive with what really happened. Oftentimes, when it comes, for example, to the book of Genesis, whenever I speak with seven-day creationists, and I have to say that I'm finding fewer and fewer seven-day creationists in my time as a priest, that seems to be, even among those who are more literalist in their interpretations, starting to die out. But when you look at the book of Genesis and you look at the days of creation, that if you understand it from the standpoint of the creation stories that were emerging at the time of Genesis when it was written, that it's the point of it is not to be taken literally. We do not believe as Catholics that the earth was created, or excuse me, all the universe was created in 7 days. Rather, what we see is that the fundamental teachings of Genesis point us to that God brought all things into existence, that creation is fundamentally good. There is this uniqueness of the human person made in God's image and likeness, being able to somehow understand and to gaze and wonder upon this world and find meaning and a connection with that origin, but also too that creation also shows us that we are fallen and that we have committed sin. And so therefore the rest of Scripture becomes a narrative of how does God reconnect that relationship with a fallen people.
Okay, this is fascinating. This is SLU, and we're speaking with Father James Krasinski of the Vatican Observatory. Fascinating, fascinating stuff. Father James, you mentioned eternity a few times
Yes.
in this last segment. Now, in cosmology, and many of our SLU members controlling the giant SLU telescopes, of course, are fascinated with the larger issues of the universe, including where does it end, how does it extend. And in recent years, there's been some data, such as the Berkeley team in 2013, indicating that the flat topology of space may indicate that space goes on and on and on, and that it's infinite. And that going in the other direction with the Big Bang, we certainly don't know what preceded that, but there are some suggestions that the universe may be eternal. That's the word you used. Now, is an eternal universe, or one that's infinite in extent, certainly it's beyond what our minds can grasp, is this compatible or incompatible with church doctrine?
Very good question. And correct me if I'm wrong, because this is where perhaps some of my deficiencies in science may show up. So at any time, Bob, you feel you need to correct me on any of this, feel free to jump in. But from my standpoint is that when we look at the created world, we see time as a dimension. And so therefore, when we understand in a scientific sense, the understanding of something that goes on forever, something that goes on infinitely, it's still within the context of a world of time, of which that dimension is present. When we speak of the infinite in the divine in terms of God, we see an existence that is not conditioned by time, that is not conditioned by any of the material dimensions of the world. And so therefore there is a difference in terms of, if you borrow a little bit of Wittgenstein, that it's not necessarily the term you use, but what's the definition underneath the term that's being used. When we understand the idea of an infinite God, it's not that there is a divine clock that goes on in heaven that can measure in a never-ending heaven. It's the idea that when you are in that realm of God, there is no time. Time does not exist.
Well, that's very nice. That is actually compatible with the way science has been going. More and more scientists are increasingly leaning toward time just being something that we humans create to make sense of things. Unlike Newton, who thought it was an actual dimension, more and more people are like Immanuel Kant, who think that it's like our numbering system. It's not something that's real, like a cucumber. It's nothing you can examine, and therefore you certainly couldn't travel through it, and it doesn't have independent existence by itself. So what you're saying is actually more and more in keeping with the way science is going, that there really is no time in reality, and the underlying reality anyway.
Yeah, and that's and thank you for that correction. I appreciate that, because one of the things in theology we're always careful to distinguish is to emphasize that one of the things that I oftentimes see people who are trying to critique faith from a scientific standpoint, a mistake that I see them to make, is that it eventually tries to make God one being within creation, and to constantly go back to that understanding that God is not a being. And it's something that is very hard for the human mind to grasp, of thinking of something, an entity that's not a being itself. And so I appreciate your correction, in terms of the understanding of time. So thank you for that.
No, that's in keeping with the line of passive understanding, isn't it? I think
Hmm.
this,
Yeah.
what we're talking about, really does passive our human symbolic language, where we have words for
Yeah.
things. I mean, actual water is not the word water. So we try to understand things with our symbolic representative language, but it's becoming clearer and clearer that there's an underlying reality that's beyond what we can even think. I
Yeah,
think
it's
that
interesting
there's.
you say that. A former classmate of mine from seminary, Father John Carchi, was just named rector of Mundelein Seminary, and he was an astrophysicist. He received his PhD from the University of Chicago. And for me at that time, um, being that I was just an infant at that point of trying to understand intellectually this relationship between faith and science, I had a conversation with him, being that he, here's an interesting guy. He's an astrophysicist, but also studying to be a priest. How do those two work for him? And precisely to your point, when I was all curious about, how does he see this all fit together? One of the things he shared with me in reflection was, he's like, James, one thing you have to remember is that it's not faith in the biblical sense, but there is an underlying faith that an astrophysicist has, that the numbers, the symbols, the expressions that are being used actually work the way you think that they're working. And speaking precisely to what you talk about, is that we have these realities that we give names to, such as water. But at the same time, there's also that exploration of human reason and refinement of human reason that has contributed to that language and will change the language in the future, and will refine it even further and give us a better understanding of the natural world. And in that process, we'll also be able to get a better understanding of the divine and of God, in terms of, as we better know how the universe works and how the world works, it gives us a deeper sense of our understanding of the source of that universe and how
Ah,
that source relates with us.
fascinating. We've been speaking with Father James of the Vatican Observatory. We're doing this here at SLU because this is the day of the lunar eclipse that's uniting many, many people in the
Mhm.
world, looking at an event that the moon and the earth are both intimately involved in. And so, of course, here we are all together, very much concerned with our planet Earth and the issues that extend beyond it. So, this was a fascinating discussion. We're really in your debt for you joining us here today. Thank you. And perhaps we'll speak to you again in the future. We appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Bob, and thank you for everything you do. I'm a SLU member, and I remember just watching your little clips that you have when I would schedule time on one of the telescopes in the Canary Islands or in Chile. Just listening to your 5 or 10 minute explanations of these objects really helped me understand the universe and nebulas and stars. And so thank you for everything that you do. And on behalf of the Vatican Observatory and the Vatican Observatory Foundation, I just thank you for inviting me on. I deeply appreciate being a guest on your show today.
Hi, Bob Berman back with you here on our special total lunar eclipse night. Wow, special night. Lunar perigee, the closest moon, the harvest moon. But what is all this moon stuff? Why is the moon so important? After all, it's a celestial body only 1/4 our size. It's really geologically dead. It has no life. It has no air. Other than the fact that it's nearby, only 250,000 miles away. Certainly we can think of many celestial objects that are more interesting. So why does it have all of this historical and scientific and cultural importance? Well, there's a lot of things. Everything since discovery of that it came about by an object colliding with Earth about 4 billion years ago. That bam, the combination of this Mars-sized object and our own planet produced the moon. We've had it, and it's slowly been spiraling away ever since then, at the rate of about 1.5 inches a year, slowly leaving us. So it's getting smaller and smaller in our sky. Still, what's the big deal? Well, scientifically, first off, we've recently found that it's not just a matter of the moon producing tides, which it does, in which some forms of animal life, especially in the intertidal marshes, the animals like crabs and others that depend on the seas rising and falling, and their predators like gulls. Beyond that, it turns out that all life on Earth would have probably been impossible without the moon. That's because the moon stabilizes Earth's axial tilt. Right now we're tilted about 23.5 degrees. And it's been calculated that without the moon, we would slowly undergo wild changes in where our tilt points, so that we would sometimes be pointed directly toward the sun, which would make everything too hot for many thousands of years at a time. It would be broiling. Life could not exist. But with the moon, that tilt stays at very nearly 23.5 degrees. It only gets more than that or less than that by about 2 degrees. So it stabilizes our conditions and probably allows life to exist in the first place. So the moon's absolutely vital. And maybe all the different cultures and civilizations through the ages not only sense that, but, well, one thing for sure is they knew about the tides. When the moon is full, as it is tonight, or new, it lines up with the sun. Even though the lunar tides by themselves are more than twice as powerful as the sun's, the two can either subtract from each other or add to each other. Tonight, when it's full, they add to each other, producing spring tides, which has nothing to do with the season of spring. It just means that the waters come up higher. The highs are higher, the lows are lower. It's as if it's all springing out at us, or maybe springing like a water spring on the earth. More water is what is the result of that. So the moon is totally important in terms of that, and regulates this kind of life, and the ancients all knew that. They also had this fascination with the moon because of its brilliance in the night sky. Although, to tell you the truth, it's less bright than most people imagine. Let me test you out on that. If you were to be asked, what is the difference between sunlight and moonlight? How many times brighter is a sunlit scene than the same scenery at night lit up by the full moon? What would you say? Do you think sunlight is 100 times greater than moonlight? 1,000 times? Very few people would guess that it's 450,000 times. About 500,000 times fainter than sunlight. And the reason we don't perceive that is because there are photochemical changes in our eyes. It's not just the changing pupils of our eyes, but the retinas themselves change their sensitivity. So we don't really perceive this huge difference in brightness between the sun and the moon. nonetheless, the moon lights up the night, and probably our lives depended on it in ancient times when there were no artificial lights, probably even before there were candles or fire. On a night with moonlight, we could see our way around, and without the moonlight, it was dark, and there were predators out there that had much better low light eyesight than we did. So if you went out on a date looking for a favorite boyfriend or girlfriend, that date could end early by some saber-toothed tiger eating you. You know, it wasn't good. So instead, the going out when the moon was bright gave us more of a chance. Maybe even that's the explanation for the fact that our estrous cycle and the menstrual cycle of humans so closely matches the phase cycle of the moon of 29 and a half days. It used to be thought that a woman's cycle was 28 days. It's now known to be much closer to 29 or 29 and a half. So it really does match the moon's phase cycle from full moon to full moon. Although there is only one other animal that does that, and that's the opossum, that has the same period menstrually. So I guess you could argue that can it be that only humans and opossums are affected by the moon in this way? So I guess you could argue both sides of that. In any case, it seems like a good explanation for why we are so aligned with the moon. There's even more of it than that. You see, the same lunar phase at conception is on average the identical lunar phase at birth. So there is an even number of lunations, of periods from full moon to the next full moon, that elapses between conception and full-term birth. So we really are linked with the moon, and again, historically and culturally, many civilizations were aware of these things. The other thing is that the moon is so round. You know, it's one of the few perfectly round objects that are seen in the natural world. In a diameter of 2,160 miles, the bulge of the moon is just 4 miles. That's 1 part in 500. It's imperceptible. So at the moment of full moon, and that's what happens at the moment of mid-eclipse tonight, it is precisely full moon. The moon is perfectly round to our eyes because nobody can see an out of roundness of only 1 part in 500. And there's not a lot of things in nature that are perfectly round. And roundness was always prized. The ancient Greeks, among others, thought that of all the geometric shapes, triangles and squares and all the rest, the circle was divine because every part of its circumference is beginningless and has no end. There's no changing sudden angles, and it's always, in all parts of it, equidistant from the center. So because of that, it was regarded as special, and we still have a legacy of that kind of belief in ceremonies like the exchange of rings, wedding rings. And again, this follows the moon. So there's a lot to the moon, and it's our only natural satellite. Mars has 2, but they're all tiny little pieces of junk, just 10 miles or so across, and irregularly.
No dia 15 de junho, as pessoas que moram em países fora da América do Norte vão poder observar o eclipse lunar. O fenômeno vai começar às 14 horas e 24 minutos no horário de Brasília e deve terminar às 20 horas. Mas o processo em que a sombra da Terra cobre completamente a Lua vai durar cerca de 1 hora e 41 minutos.
The landing stages from the Apollo missions can be viewable. The answer is forget it. No way. So
Despite that, it's fascinating, and it's one of the reasons that SLU members love going back to the moon over and over again. It may be gray and colorless and simply the nearest celestial object to us, but you know what? It does not lose its thrill. It's the most detailed object we can ever see through our telescopes, and it's always fascinating. For SLU, I'm Bob Berman.
A cada novo trabalho.
Você E você fica agora com a primeira imagem do dia. O céu da noite deste domingo está enfeitado pela superlua, que é como se chama o perigeu lunar, o momento em que a lua está mais próxima da Terra. E coincide ainda com o eclipse lunar, que pode ser visto em todo o Brasil.
Friday.
Astronomical Society, Matt Marula in New Hampshire, and of course some of our SLU people, the often SLU host Will Gator, Paul Cox, our chief engineer, Trish and her team of engineers in Connecticut. This is an international effort bringing you this total lunar eclipse. It's everything we hoped it would be. Just absolutely great. We've also brought you other ancillary information, a interview with a Vatican astronomer, just a lot of fun. So we're in our final minutes now as the moon creeps out of Earth's main dark shadow, the umbral shadow. We have a countdown for you right there on your screen. You can see it just a matter of minutes. And the moon will still have an uneven lighting because even though it'll be out of the main shadow, part of the moon will remain for another hour or so.
Não importa quem você é, não importa o que você fez, Jesus conhece o seu interior também. Quantas vezes você caiu tentando acertar, mas a tristeza e o desespero te fizeram chorar. Não importa pra onde você foi, se na escuridão da noite Ele apaga o seu passado e não desiste de você. Ele não desiste de você, Ele se importa com você, Ele compreende seu caminhar. Nunca vi um amor tão grande assim. Ele não desiste de você, Ele se importa com você, Ele compreende o seu caminhar. Nunca vi um amor tão grande assim. Ele não desiste. Quem você é, não importa o que você fez, Jesus conhece o seu interior também. Quantas vezes você caiu tentando acertar, mas a tristeza e o desespero te fizeram chorar. Não importa pra onde você foi, se na escuridão da noite Ele apaga o seu passado e não desiste de você. Ele não desiste de você, Ele se importa com você, Ele compreende seu caminhar. Nunca vi um amor tão grande assim. Ele não desiste de você, Ele se importa com não importa pra onde você foi. Se na escuridão da noite ele apaga o seu passado e não desiste de você. Ele se importa, ele compreende. Nunca viu amor tão grande assim. De você, ele se importa com você. Ele compreende seu caminhar. Nunca viu amor tão grande assim. Ele não desiste, não desiste. Ele não desiste.